Hi, Mickey Lorkowski here. I was just going to post a video about the Euthyphro dilemma because the structure gets a little complicated. But I also just wanted to remind you that these are the kind of things I could do to walk you through any of the more difficult points you're having in the course, and I could very easily post such videos in the Ask Your Instructor section. So let's talk about how the Euthyphro question presents a dilemma to divine command theory. To understand that fully, first of all, we need to know what divine command theory says. This is a very, very, very specific theory of ethics. This is not a theory of religion. This is a theory of ethics. As such, it says something about what makes an action good, therefore meta-ethics in that sense. Divine command theory gives one very, very specific answer. What makes any action right or wrong is God's free command. And the word free does a lot of the work there, so we'll circle back to that. So, first of all, free in the sense they're using it um, means that God is wholly in control of whatever it commands. As such, a command is free if God could have equally commanded A or not A. If, for instance, there's a whole bunch of reasons to command A and no reasons to command not A, or very few or poor reasons to command not A, that is actually not a free command by their notion. It has to be 50-50. God has to be equally able to command one or the other. And so people who defend this view say that it's out of God's majesty, full power, and control over absolutely everything. That's divine command theory. Next, make sure you know what a dilemma is. A dilemma is not a synonym for problem. A dilemma is, in fact, a very specific kind of problem. A dilemma only happens when you have exactly two options, neither option is desirable. In fact, if you have three options, it's called a trilemma instead. So two options, neither is desirable. For instance, here's something that's not a dilemma. If someone says, oh, you have to choose between getting a coupon for a free ice cream sundae or getting hit with a baseball bat. That is not a dilemma because there is one unproblematic option very clearly. You don't have to hem and haw and rack your brain over which to choose. So it has to be two options, has to be both options have some sort of problem. So an everyday dilemma might be you're writing bills at the end of the month and you only have enough money left in your account to pay the electric bill or the gas bill. Now, the dilemma then is if you pay the gas bill, then you can't pay the electric, and if you pay the electric, you can't pay the gas. So if you've ever seen the movie Sophie's Choice, she was in a very unfortunate position where she had to choose between which of her kids died in the Holocaust. Neither option is desirable. So that's a dilemma. The Euthyphro question comes out of Plato's Euthyphro dialogue. He used many gods and piety, but to make it relevant, we could recast it for divine command theorists and say, is it good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? First of all, notice no God, no problem. The only people that have to answer the Euthyphro question are people who say there's a God who commands, and that everything that God commands is good. First of all, notice none of that in and of itself makes you a divine command theorist. Saying God commands only good things is also consistent with just a God being good and instructing people about ethics. So that's basically the other option, the Euthyphro dilemma. But if I want to connect goodness and God's commands in some way, if I am one of the people who wants to say everything God commands is good, then I have to answer the Euthyphro question. Is it good because God commanded it, or does God command it because it is good? Notice there's two options, so we can start to see a dilemma coming. Historically, the first option, it's good because God commands it, is called the voluntarist option because it's a product of God's choice. The second option is traditionally called the intellectualist option because God is using reasons to command things if God commands it because it is good. So, to finish the dilemma, I would have to show why each of those is a problem. So why think it's problematic to say God commands it because it is good? There's a couple of kinds of problems associated with this, and I think especially um, if you poke around online, some of the authors tend to underplay this. But there's, first of all, problems with it being a very shaky foundation for ethics. For instance, if God's commands are free, then God could just as easily command um, just that go from do not kill to kill. God could change its commands at a whim and every day if God wanted to. And as soon as you start saying, wait a minute, God wouldn't change its commands, you've just said the command's not free, and hence you're actually rejecting divine command theory. Other entailments, if God's free command is the sole determinant of ethics, that has a very undesirable consequence that the divine command theorist has to say the only thing wrong with torturing children to death is God said not to. If you think there's more wrong than that, you're just not a divine command theorist. Leibniz had a really interesting problem. Leibniz said, well, wait a minute. If you take the voluntarist option, then God is good as a definition. But when I say God is good, that's praise. And so if you think saying things like God is good is praise rather than definition, once again, not a divine command theorist. And so these are all problems that just circle around the notion that God's free commands, not bound by reason, is a really shaky foundation for ethics. But there's another set of problems as well, because if I want to be a divine command theorist, I also have to say I know what God commanded. And you might be able to make the argument that holy texts give you the very general idea and big picture stuff. You could get into that if you want, but not uninterpreted. So take a simple command like, thou shalt not kill. Well, does that require interpretation? It seems to. Does that mean I can't kill animals for food? Does that mean I can't kill in war? Does that mean I can't kill in self-defense? Does that mean I can't drive a car because it's going to kill insects? That command itself doesn't say, which means we must have some sort of interpretation. Now, first of all, interpreting holy text is not a bad thing. I cannot emphasize that enough. But for the divine command theorist, it is, because remember, the divine command theorist says that God's commands are free, which means not bound by reason. As such, if I am using reason to arrive at a reasonable interpretation of a holy text, then I'm implicitly implying that God's commands are bound by reason, which means they're not free. So if you need to interpret any text whatsoever and make an assumption that God is reasonable, great. I hope you do that when in your interpretation of holy text. But at the same time, realize it makes you something besides a divine command theorist because you are implicitly assuming that there are reasons for God's commands, which for the divine command theorist would mean they're not free. So far, we've only talked about half a dilemma, right? We've only talked about problems with the voluntarist option saying that it is good because God commanded it. That doesn't make a dilemma. That only shows that half is a problem. So we could just as easily be in the ice cream sundae baseball bat scenario. So the second problem we have to talk about is what's wrong with the intellectualist option. And this is where it's really important to realize the intellectualist option is only a problem for divine command theorists. No one else has a problem with the intellectualist option. Everyone else could say option B, what's the problem? Remember, the intellectualist option says that God commands it because it is good. What's wrong with saying that if you believe in a good God? Well, nothing, unless you're a divine command theorist. Remember, the divine command theorist says that the command is what made it good. But if you say God commands it because it's good, then that automatically implies with that word because that something besides the command itself made it good, which is an option that the divine command theorist and only the divine command theorist cannot say. Hence, a dilemma with divine command theory.